Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shelly, the owner and creator of the Vintage Hen and Chick, and today we're diving into some fun trash to treasure magic. I've got two thrifted frame makeovers, one with beginner friendly decoupage using rice paper, and yes, there's a free printable, plus a salvaged wood flip turned into cozy wall decor with pockets. Now let's get started. For project one, I have this piece of salvaged wood that has these pockets in it. I'm not sure what it is, but I wanted to give it a makeover to hang it on my kitchen wall. And so I'm going to be using a combination of Sweet Pickins milk paint in the color Summer Cottage and Pantry Door. I'm doing equal parts of each and making my own custom color. And if you've never used milk paint before, it's very easy. It's just half milk paint and half water, and you stir it up real well for about 2 minutes, and then I set mine aside for about 10 minutes to thicken up because you want it the consistency of a melted milkshake. And I am using my Dixie Belle French tip brush to apply the milk paint to this piece because it's got a nice pointy tip and there's a lot of corners and tight areas that a regular brush wouldn't do so well with. So I'm going to give this piece 2 good coats of my milk paint all over. I'm going to let it dry completely in between each coats, and once it's dry, then we'll come back to the second step in this project. I did 2 coats of my milk paint combination. I let it dry completely in between each coat, and I have some nice crazing and crackling. And now I'm just going to take my 220 grit sanding sponge and sand the entire piece. What this is going to do, it's going to smooth everything out, and it's also going to bring out any cracking or chipping of the paint that it's going to do. So I'm going to continue to sand the entire piece, and then we'll move on to the next step. My piece is all sanded and smoothed out, and I do have some beautiful cracking and chipping, and now it's time to seal it. Whenever you use milk paint, you do need to seal it, and my favorite sealer for the milk paint is the Sweet Pickins oil wax, and I'm using the dark oil wax for this project. I'm also using a little sponge dauber. I like to use sponge brushes or these sponge daubers for the oil wax, just because you can throw it away when you're done for one thing, and for another thing, the oil wax gets soaked into that sponge and then it makes it easier to get into any tight corners or spaces. So I'm going to apply my dark oil wax over the entire piece, and once I have everything coated with the oil wax, then I'm going to set it aside for about 10 minutes and really let that oil wax absorb into the milk paint. And once that's done, then we'll come back and buff off the excess oil wax. I'll let the oil wax absorb into my milk paint for about 10 to 15 minutes. And now I'm just taking a dry paper towel and wiping off the excess oil wax. I also like to use a paper towel in one hand to hold my piece in place while I'm wiping the excess off with the other hand. The one thing about oil wax is you want to make sure that you can get fingerprints in it with the oil wax until it's completely cured, which is why I like to use the paper towel in the one hand, just so I don't get those fingerprints. So I'm going to wipe this completely dry until there's no oil wax residue left behind, and then this project is completed. For project 2, I have this picture frame with this lighthouse on it. I've had this in my stash for years. I love the long, narrow frame shape. I'm just not a fan of the lighthouse image. So we are going to give this a makeover today. And the first thing I need to do is to take the frame apart and take the image out. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint directly on the image that was in the frame. And for that, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Mint Julep chalk paint. And I'm going to give this image 2 good coats of the chalk paint just to make sure that I get everything covered up in the image and you don't see any of that coming through. So I'm going to give this 2 coats. I'm going to let it dry completely in between each coat, and then we'll move on to the next step. My 2 coats of paint have completely dried. I am going to be applying a transfer to this surface, but first I want to do a very faint backdrop. And for that, I'm going to be using the IOD ephemeral type stamp and the IOD mixing white ink. I just wanted a very faint backdrop behind my transfer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stamp, I'm going to apply my mixing white ink to the area that I'm going to stamp, and then just lay my stamp down on my surface. I'm going to use my hand to smooth it out to make sure that stamp gets on my entire surface, and I'm going to go across this sheet from left to right until I have a stamped backdrop over the entire piece. I let the stamped area on my project completely dry, and now it's time to add the transfer. And I'm going to be using IOD's Lost Garden transfer. And what I did is I just cut out some pieces that fit my surface. And one of the things that I like about the Lost Garden transfer is it's a repeating pattern. So you can start from one side and repeat the pattern all the way across a project. Now, if you've never used a transfer before, it's very easy. You just peel off that back sheet, you lay your transfer down on your surface, and then you're going to use your transfer tool that comes with all your transfer sets and rub it over your transfer. Once you have that done, you start from one side of the transfer and peel up that vellum as you rub with your transfer tool to attach the transfer to your project. Once you have your transfer completely attached, then I like to take either my hand or the transfer vellum and rub it over the surface, and this is called burnishing. And what burnishing does is it makes sure your transfer is completely applied to your project and that there are no wrinkles or bubbles in your transfer. So I'm going to continue that same process, working across my project, applying my transfer sheet down in the same manner, laying it down, rubbing it with my transfer tool, starting from one side, working to the next as I lift up that transfer vellum and as that transfer is applying to my project. As you can see with the Lost Garden transfer, it has that repeating pattern. And so I am just matching up the pattern as I go across on my project so everything looks like one cohesive piece. Now, most generally, you do want to seal your transfers because this is going behind glass in a frame. You wouldn't necessarily have to seal it, but I'm going to just for extra protection. And I'm going to be using my Dixie Belle Clear Coat Satin Coverage to seal the entire piece in, just giving it one good coat. It's going to give it a little bit of a sheen. It's going to seal that transfer in, and it's going to make it look beautiful behind the glass in the frame. Now my clear coat has completely dried and now it's time to put the frame back together. I cleaned my glass really well and that's already laid down in the frame. Now I'm going to put my project piece inside the frame and then the cardboard backing on the frame. I'm going to put this frame back together using my framing tool. This is an excellent tool to have on hand if you're upcycling a lot of frames. I got this on Amazon and I will leave the link below in the description box for my framing tool. I loved the color of the frame as is, the black, so I did nothing to that. So now that my frame is all back together, this piece is completely finished. For project 3, we're going to be doing a beginner-friendly decoupage process using some rice paper. Our first step, though, is to take the frame apart. Once we get the entire frame taken apart, then we're going to move on to the next step, which is working on the frame. Now I'm going to apply some Sweet Pickins Crackle to my frame. I liked the color blue and I want that to show through my top coat. And so I'm going to apply one coat of the crackle around the entire frame on the front, the sides, and the inside part of the frame. Two things to note about Sweet Pickins Crackle: the heavier the coat you put on, the bigger the crackle; the lighter the coat, the finer the crackle. And so I'm just going to put one light coat of the crackle on my frame. We'll set that aside, let it dry completely, and then move on to the next step. So we're going to be applying some decoupaged rice paper to the inside of the frame. And first of all, we need to give it a coat of paint. And I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Silk All-in-One paint in the color Sun Kissed. Whenever I decoupage, I typically like to have a light background behind my decoupage paper because that's going to make your decoupage paper stand out more. And so I'm going to give this 2 coats of the sun-kissed paint. We're going to let it dry thoroughly in between each coat, and then we're going to move on to the next step in this project. The crackle has dried thoroughly on my frame, and now it's time to give the top coat of paint. And for that, I'm going to be using the Dixie Belle Silk All-in-One Sun-Kissed paint again. And the reason why I chose the silk line, because it's an all-in-one. So it's a primer, it's the paint color, and it's a top coat all-in-one. And so I won't have to seal this when I'm done. And so I'm just giving a light coat over the crackle. You don't want to overbrush, otherwise you're going to get some drag marks. And you can see already that the crackle is working and the blue paint is starting to show through my sun-kissed. So I'm going to continue to give this a coat of the sun-kissed, then we'll let this set aside to dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. The paint on my frame insert has dried completely. I did give it 2 coats and let it dry in between each coat. And now I want to give a little backdrop to my insert before I decoupage. And I'm going to be using the IOD Garden Bouquet stamp, and I'm going to be using some black ink. And so I'm going to take my stamp and I'm going to apply just a little bit of black ink. I don't want it too juicy or too dark. I just want a little faint backdrop. So I'm going to apply the black ink to the stamp, and then I'm going to stamp it in a couple of the corners on the backdrop, and then I'm just going to take the excess ink that's on the stamp and just randomly apply it on the rest of the frame insert, just to give a little bit of a backdrop and some visual interest to the board when I apply my decoupaged rice paper. For my decoupage, I am using the Botanical Birds and Blooms image. And if you love this image that I'm using in this project, it's actually a free printable that I designed just for you. You can download it and use it in your own DIY creations for free. And I'll put the link for that below in the description box. And I'm just taking my paintbrush and some water, and I'm using the water method to go around my image. And then I'm gonna just tear around the image that I want to decoupage on my project. I didn't want the harsh edges that a scissors would leave. I wanted more of an organic look. I printed my image on some rice paper in order to decoupage it onto my surface, and I'll leave the link below to my favorite rice paper. I get it on Amazon. And so now it's time to apply the image to our surface, and for that I'm using my favorite decoupage medium, which is the Dixie Belle Clear Coat in the satin finish. And so I'm just going to start from one side of my image and work to the other side. I'm going to lay down a layer of my clear coat. I'm going to lay my image down, smooth it out with my brush to make sure any of the wrinkles or bubbles are completely smoothed out, and then I'll work on the other side of the image, gently lifting that up, applying more of my decoupage medium, and then smoothing my image down with whatever's left on my brush. And this does all need to be sealed, and so I'm just going to take my brush and go over the entire frame insert with my Dixie Belle Clear Coat to seal everything in. Everything has dried, and now it's time to put the frame back together. I cleaned the glass really well, and now we're going to put everything back together. So I'm going to lay the glass in the frame and then our image in the frame. Now remember, this pretty little print that I used, it's a freebie just for my creative friends. So make sure and grab it at the link below in my description box and make something beautiful with it. And now that this frame is all back together, this project is complete. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and don't forget to grab your free printable. I will leave that link in the description box below, and all the supplies I used today are available on my website at thevintagehenandchick.com. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss next week's DIY, and let me know in the comments what project was your favorite.